be able to do. And it's not anything that you have done or not done by some arbitrary sentence. How in the world, if I can't get a job, if I can't even get my axe out of the pawn shop, if I can't even get the money to get on the subway, how am I going to love anybody except in such an awful pain and rage that nobody could bear it? I'm not trying to defend it, I'm trying to make you see it. Yeah. And you see what
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming.
We're going to play one more, the Daryl video.
One moment. I'm going to reshare my screen.
Wow, look at all those beautiful faces.
Let there be new flowering in the fields. Let the fields turn mellow for the men. Let the men keep tender through the time. Let the time be rested from the war. Let the war be won. Let love be at the end.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see everyone's faces.
Me too. Okay, everyone. Bear with me. My voice is coming back. It was lost doing a lot of talking, a lot of performing. My name is Aja Monet. I'm here with an incredible team, the Voices team, which is a part of an organization called V-Day. And we are here to create a new interdisciplinary performance arts project and campaign grounded in Black women's stories by V-Day to unify the vision of ending violence against women, cis women, trans women, non-binary people across the African continent, the African diaspora, and the globe. Our goal is to use art to embody and inspire solidarity making in our collective imagination. You all are joining us for our first book club meeting with a book called The Will to Change. Before we begin and open up and tell you more, I just want to introduce the rest of the team or have them introduce themselves. Today, my co-facilitator will be none other than the lovely Brittany. Hi, Brittany. What's up?
Hi, everyone. Okay, my name's Brittany. My pronouns are she, her. I'm part of the Voices team with these lovely Black women. And I'm excited to get into these readings with you guys and with everyone. And Helen Hollis.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here virtually with you all. My name is Helen. You probably received an email from me or a few regarding the book and the Zoom details. I, along with Brittany and also collaboratively with the rest of the team, handled our digital presence. So if you've seen all our graphics, our flyers, things like that, we all kind of collaborate on that, and I handle the digital strategy. So thank you for being here. Really excited to get into this conversation. It's so juicy, and I'll pass it on to Hollis.
Thanks, Helen. I'm Hollis, everyone. She, her pronouns. Very excited to be with everyone today and dig into the book. So I'll turn things back over to Aja.
What do you do, Hollis?
I also work on the Voices team, and I'm supporting and creating the piece that will be debuting sometime this fall.
Awesome. Okay. So the reason why, first of all, give it up for yourselves for making it and valuing this time and this moment with us to talk about a book that has transformed and touched my life. And I'm hoping has shared and given insight to all of you on some of the things that you're all grappling with in this moment. We value your time and we value your presence. And we know that we can't change anything without showing up. Showing up is the first step to change. Showing up for yourself and showing up for your community. And one of the big things that we believe in as Black feminists is that our fates are interconnected and that we need each other and we depend on each other. We believe in solidarity. And within solidarity, the individual is sacred and an important member that we depend on for collective unity. But to be in solidarity with a person or a group of people is to understand that their struggles and their joys are intimately connected to our own. For us, solidarity is action and risk for the sake of our shared visions for community, care, freedom, and liberation. None of us are free until we are all free. Solidarity requires compassion and love for all beings on earth and the earth itself. It is the understanding of life as a sacred force. And so we move into this space with you all with that understanding that we are here to practice and show up in solidarity with one another. That each of us, though we may be different and though we may be individuals, are here for a collective goal and purpose. And in that shared collective goal and purpose, we believe liberation is possible. I'm going to shoot it on over to Brittany as we get some community guidelines. And then we want to get into the nitty gritty of this book. We want to talk to you about this book. So Brittany, take it from there.
Yes, thank you all for being in this space with us. So we just wanted to have a few guidelines out there. So just to like make communication easier between everyone, we just want everyone to put their name and pronouns as their name. You can rename yourself by pressing the 3 dots on the edge of the Zoom screen, or if you're on a phone, it's probably at the bottom of your phone. And then you click rename and you could rename yourself. And we just ask that everyone respect each other, respect the space, respect each other's pronouns. And if you want to speak, we're going to be doing a system where you just type your name into the chat, and then we'll put you on stack to speak so that we give everyone a chance to share their opinions. And I'm going to turn it over to Aja again. We're going to start discussing like some of the parts of the book that y'all enjoyed.
Yeah, before we begin, I want to say, does the collective have any community guidelines that they would like to share that they practice in their own community that they would like to input? Helen, go ahead. And please feel free to raise your hand if you notice that we don't see you in the chat. Go ahead, Helen.
Yes, I love the community norm called step up, step back, just to make sure that like we get enough voices communicating in the room, so that not the same person is talking all the time, and just so that we like respect each other and like listen to each other. Step up if you find yourself not speaking enough, but step back if you find yourself speaking more often than others, just to give everyone a chance to say something and contribute to the conversation.
Any others? Okay, well, dope. So the way that this is going to run, we would love for every book club meeting that we have, for us to be doing 2 chapters every 2 weeks. So that gives folks time to sit, digest, think through what they've read, talk about it, all that, ruminate. And the biggest thing is we would like for every club meeting to kind of have the same sort of structure. So the goal would be that we would come in with lines that we feel, or quotes of things that really resonated with us, so that while you're reading over the next few weeks, we hope that you are just, underlining things or jotting things down. What stuck out to you, what impacted you, and particularly what impacted your ideas about your relationships towards men and masculinity, as well as your ideas about how to respond or how to change the sort of conditions we live in the society that we're in, right? So anything that stands out to you, because Bell Hooks, she be giving them gunner lines, you know what I'm saying? She gives us them lines, sometimes they really be hitting. So we want to make sure that we're celebrating that, okay? We're celebrating the lines that resonate with us. When we find, I believe that literature liberates. So when we find language that actually resonates and deeply speaks to something that we felt in our interior world that maybe we didn't have words for before, we're like, wow, found these words. She had the words that I never knew I had the words, for. That's something to celebrate. That's something for us to connect to, because that means that there's some nugget of truth that we're all deeply sharing in, right? Questions that are raised. So just as you're reading over the next few weeks, what are questions that are coming up for you? What are things that make you be like, yeah, I don't know about that. Like Belle was hitting it over here, but over here, it wasn't resonating. Or I wonder what the group thinks about this. I would love to know what the group thinks about this. Feel free to do that, because we're going to do that order in the meeting. What brought discomfort and what was affirming? So what are things that were uncomfortable for you to sit with? I know that the reason why we started this to read this book was because I've read this book years ago. And when I read it, it really changed a lot for me, because I think I had assumed that the problem was all men. I had internalized that idea that, oh, the issue is men, they got to fix themselves, and then maybe the world could get in order, get right. Now, that's not true, but we do have a role in that too. As women, or people who identify as women, non-binary folks, trans folks, we have a role in how we facilitate those who choose gendered, realities in the world. How do we start to hold each other accountable to what that looks like, and to create new and expansive ideas about how we show up in those, in our gender identities, right? And then the other part of it is, our movement continues to be in a space of race, in a discussion of race and class, which is important. All these things are important, but we know that they're a three-headed monster, right? So there's this intersection that we want to have a conversation about. We can't talk about the prison industrial complex without talking about, the ways that mothers are, without talking about housing and displacement, the ways that reproductive rights, and talking about women who are being assaulted, and the victims of those who are dealing with these things, and the perpetrators of violence, right? Like we have to have conversations about the many different facets of harm and how we deal with that harm. And so the first person that I would like to, and then the last thing we'll do in the talks is we'll go into takeaways. So what are the main takeaways we got from the conversation? What do we feel like after we all talked through and had ideas and had different back and forths? What are the things that we feel like we want to leave with? You keep the things that were hard and difficult and you needed to let go of, keep them here in this room, right? What are the things that we need to let go of? And then what are the things that we're going to take away? So those are things that's kind of how we see the arc of today going. The reason why I'm so excited for us to begin is the first person I would like to just because I don't know how much time he has on the call with us, and I'm glad that he's a guest for today. The first person I would like to give some feedback on this book and on the will to change before we kind of get in and dive into everybody talking about the book and what resonated for them. Bobby Gons is somebody who is very, 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 I met him through a mutual friend, and who does a lot of prison work, prison reform work, and trying to end the carceral system. But he had a 25 to life sentence, and he's someone that when I met him, his perspective and his way of talking about the world, you could tell that this is someone who has done a lot of introspection and a lot of deep interior work to better themselves. And I think what we're hoping for in this conversation at the bare minimum is that no one shows up with the assumption of knowing it all or having all the answers, but that the primary thing that Bell Hooks is asking is the will to change, is the will, the very will, the seeing something wrong and saying, I'm going to do something about it. I am invested and I am completely committed to changing and to learning how change will impact my community. And so I wanted to leave room for Bobby to tell his own story a little bit and tell us what he felt about what he read in the preface and the first chapter in terms of what was affirming. And we can go from there as a collective as we describe what our ideas around masculinity and how we start to talk about what we want to see from men who are willing to change. So Bobby, join us.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I thank y'all for having me. In the clutch too. Did a bit of a scan read as much as possible to just really tap in. And more than anything, I just, well first, it's been an honor home, adjusting, adapting. But more than anything, placing my energy towards remembering everything that I did feel in those cells. All that I had learned about myself and how I learned to love myself, because that was going to be the first place I could run to if ever I struggled with it out here. So when it comes to mind with this book and what Bell Hooks has written or has challenged us all to reflect on, you know, one of the main things that just off top comes to me was the first lie I ever believed was that boys don't cry. And overall, in order for me to even become the man that I've become today, it first required me to be able to come to a point where I no longer regretted a poor choice of mine, but that I had remorse for it, and that I had found true remorse and accountability. And so, off top, for everyone in this this conversation, it is a privilege and an honor for me to start with saying that I was everything that was toxic in my community, and in fact wave the flag of gang culture and machismo and you know, consider the concepts that were handed down to me and my own family as being a man and what that means, or at least a half explanation, and that it took the deepest reflection inside those cells that I sat in as a boy, to really reverse and unlearn what I had been taught all my life, from the moment that I first had expressed some type of fear or anxiety. In other words, weakness and possibly cowardice just for being sensitive. More than anything, too, is what begins in this reading, too, is that, you know, I heard Ajel, you said that you thought men were the problem, and that coming to a point where that had evolved. One thing that that really resonates with me is men not knowing how to be men is the problem, or at least a hindrance. And I definitely know that that's what raised me to be anything that looked toxic or unhealthy. It was the men in my life that didn't know how to be men, and being taught one half as if like bravery, aggression, not being a punk, and things that we hear on the usual dialogue, that it was only half. That being a man was also willing to be, knowing when to be gentle, knowing when to find balance, delegate, to trust, knowing when to be sweet, even to oneself before anything. And that's mostly what I stand on. And more than anything, too, just on the scan of the preface notes, things like that. Again, forgive me for not necessarily being specifically on the topic, I guess. But one thing that popped out to me that I wanted to like first thing that came to my mind is the first time I ever tried yoga, like actually just trying to stretch just because I was in pain and learning about how in ancient times that was considered very masculine, and how just attempting to open my mind up to the concept of yoga and how it could help me. That was seen as soft. That was seen as like, what is this, right? And how in today's culture or in our society today, that's a common thing amongst men. Something very soft, very it's a if anything, right? Like, don't get me wrong, it's very popular, but I'm just saying, first thought amongst the men that raised me is that's too soft for them. And to actually know the truth and beginnings and the origins of things, it was what made men able to tap into their actual inner self, their inner voice, and reflect, so that they can know how to be men. So I'll leave it there for the most part, and I thank you for having me and hearing me out again.
Dope. Thank you so much, Bobby. You were definitely on topic. I don't know what you're talking about. So just to set up for everyone who wants to chime in, I think we would love to start with what are lines that resonated for folks. We have some of our own that we shared, but I would love for people to let us know what are some things that stuck out for you all in the preface or the first chapter. We can just go in. Let's just go in. And feel free to put your name in the chat.
I could start too. In the preface, one thing that really stood out to me, and I could find the exact line in a bit, but it's where Bell Hooks says, as a young woman in my 20s who had not yet found her own powers, I often wish the men in my life would die. My longing for my father's death began in childhood. It was the day I responded to his rage, his violence. I used to dream him gone, dead and gone. If only he would die, we could live. Yes, so I just wanted to start with that because she put that in the preface, and when I read that, I was like,
yeah. Why did that stick out for you, and did that stick out for anybody else? And Danielle, you can go next.
Yeah. One of the lines that stuck out to me, I think it was actually in the first chapter, and it says, "Mother love is a plenty and apparent. We complain because we have too much of it. The love of a father is an uncommon gem to be hunted, burnished, and hoarded. The value goes up because of its scarcity." And I thought that really resonated with me, at least.
Can you guys also just remember to please, put the page numbers so we can all kind of flip.
Yes. Yeah, so this is
page 4. I put it in for you, Danielle.
I guess my page is different because it's electronic.
Oh, my bad.
Sorry. But this really resonated with me because at least my father was not really a part of my life a lot due to work and disinterest in kind of the children growing up. But then also I noticed my mother, because I was always there and always willing to spend time with her, reverse was true as well. My love for her seemed to be like, there was too much of it. She always wanted to spend time with my brothers. And there was always this clear difference because my brothers wouldn't want to spend time with her, especially as adults. So it always felt like similar to me. I felt that reflected back, that she always like sought after my brothers and always wanted to spend time with them. And if they didn't spend time with her, it was like the world was falling apart. And yet I was always there whenever she needed me. And so noticing that discrepancy even be perpetuated onto a child, I that really stuck out with me. And I thought it was very interesting.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to respond to that? to what Danielle, did that resonate for other folks?
It definitely resonated for me. And I think that, especially the line about it, like the value going up because of its scarcity. Just, I think the way we celebrate, people who have fathers in their lives, or even, it's like, oh, wow, you have a dad, or you all have a relationship. It's just, I just think in culture, we celebrate it in a different way. And yeah, that is held like an uncommon gem. Like, wow, you really bang with your dad, So yeah, I definitely highlighted that line as well, Danielle.
Folks say in the chat that Shira disagreed when she said that father's love is more valued than mother's. How do folks feel about that?
I guess I can expand on that. Like, I was just thinking, I think I understood what she might have meant, and this is just my inference, to say that just based on positionality, as we're talking about like scarcity of what is presently like more abundant or front facing, it's like the feminine side of love, mother's care, always present. Like, what do you want as soon as you come home? Let me make you something. Like, there's so many ways that we can see that that's always expressed. But then on the opposite end, especially I think in between like gendered relationships, like how is a father's love expressed? So I wouldn't say that it's valued more. I think just as far as her like examining the quantity of what is perceived to be more present, I understand how she's saying it's valued more. But like I wouldn't agree with that at all. I think both are important.
Yeah, I think there's like an assumption of the mother having to care. Like, one of the things that we know to be true is that there's a lot of shame around mothers who are not the most archetypal, like do everything, show up, be super excited about having children, right? That if a woman, someone who identifies as a woman decides to have a child, that the assumption is that they should be very excited about it and should give up their whole life for that child. Whereas I think there is a bit more of acceptance for fathers to kind of have a standoff role and tap in when they can and provide in the ways that they do. But even then, there's like a bare minimum that we expect, right? Are there any other lines or feedback that folks have about this specific line? Go ahead, Danielle. You raise your hand.
Yeah, so kind of speaking to that too. And I think it really does a disservice to men, because the men who really want children and really want to be a part of their lives face this stigma and these barriers to being a part of it. Like people assume that that they aren't they do when they constantly like praise them when they're just doing the bare minimum and just being a father. It kind of like sets them up so that they think that if they're too involved or if they're too affectionate with their children, that they'll somehow seem less masculine. And I've talked to a number of guys when I've just been in the dating world who've talked about how they hate there's a stigma of like men can't be alone with children, and people worry about men being alone with their own children and things like that, as though fatherly love is not something that can be shown to children. And it's kind of sad, and it really holds them back, because there was a recent study that showed when men actually were more involved in child caring and a part of their children's lives, it decreases their risk of suicide. That over time, it's actually protective against suicide. And men who are not as involved in kids' lives and focus more on just the breadwinner role, their risk of suicide increases. And this was seen universally across multiple cultures.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, another line that stuck out to me, Brittany, I don't know if you have some other, we got a lot of lines. I don't know if y'all got lines, but we're willing to throw them out there if y'all aren't. Okay. So the place where men, this is on page 2 in chapter 1, the place where most men refuse to change, believe themselves unable to change, was in their emotional lives. Not even for the love and respect of liberated women were men willing to come to the table of love as equal partners ready to share the feast. What do y'all feel about that? Or were there other lines? We're down to go back and forth with lines.
Yeah, I want to just jump in and talk about expectations on love and what, like, creating a loving environment, like how that's often placed on women to do emotional labor, to do that care. And if there is not things in order or whatever, even if women and men are working equally, it goes back to, well, it was the woman's responsibility to do that, to create that environment, to take on that emotional labor, even though we're also required to do everything else as well. So I think that stood out to me in your line, Aja. And then also, I had written down a line, and I'm listening to the audiobook, so I don't have the page numbers or anything, but we cannot heal what we cannot feel. And I feel like that goes both for men and women. I've met women who are going through toxic femininity, if we should say, if we should speak, just like holding in so much until they snap, right? Or men as well. And then this other part that Bell Hooks talks about, which I thought was so beautiful, and I had to send this as a text to my partner because I was like, this is so real, is that, men are on the quest for a ready-made woman, and that they, because they think that problems in relationships can't be worked out, right? And
what page is that on?
I have the audiobook, but I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. And anyway, so and it's easier to bolt when things, it is in the first chapter, but I don't know the page. It's easier to bolt when things don't work out than to deal with emotions and the conflict, mostly because we're so like, feelings feel like it's, oh my God, this is uncomfortable. We're not taught to deal with our feelings. And so it's easier to suppress or to avoid. So anyway, throwing that out there for y'all.
David.
Oh, hey y'all, David, he, him, ellos. There were 2 different lines, but the line I'll share now that stuck out to me was on chapter 1. I have big font and I also have the like on the iPad, but page 41, it's for me, and it's just, the truth we do not tell is that men are longing for love. Like just that sentence alone, obviously the whole book is like fire, but that just really stuck out to me. I was just like, okay, like it very just put me in a place of reflection of like, damn, at what point am I hiding that I'm longing for love, right? Or at what point am I like trying not to be vulnerable, or I'm like not showing it? So it just made me think.
Can we, David, I think this is fair for you to answer, or any of the other men as well, or women, or, non-binary folks, whoever wants to respond. But particularly I would like to hear from the men is, what does love mean and look like? Like, I feel like we're like, there's this conversation and it's kind of like this thing where we think we know what we mean when we say we love or we're showing up for love. What does love look and feel like for us to start to kind of give an idea for what we're talking about with each other?
So for me, I also didn't finish it, but All About Love. And in the preface, it really resonated with me when Belle is saying, or Miss Hooks, I don't know what folks refer to Bell Hooks as, but in All About Love, she talks about you wanting the best for the person, or like you want their spirit or their soul to have, like, to be well, or you want the best for it. And that just resonated since reading that. I was like, like when I think of the relationships and the folks that I say love, whether it's family, friends, parents, whatever, or my partner, Hannah, like it really is like, damn, I want your soul to be well, you know, like I want everything for you, you know. So that's kind of the start of it for me. It varies in degrees in either way from there.
I think Nonel wanted to respond, and then we have Juan on stack after Nonel.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, just in response to what David was saying, I forget what the exact quote you said, but that men want to be loved, they don't know they want to be loved. Is that it, David? Yeah. And so, like, for my own dad, you know, he very loving, very open-minded, but was very, he had to hold the power all the time. He had to, you know, he was always kind of expressing something and like felt restrained in that he wanted, you know, more time with me or my brother or with other people. But I think that this a lifetime of like not expressing that made it very intense for my brother, my mom, and I. And you know, going back to the what Brittany brought up about, you know, wanting that, like wishing upon, you know, the father's death, it wasn't like that for me but at all. But I remember just thinking when I was younger, like, wow, I wish, you know, maybe I could like live separately, just because I need a break from, you know, all this intensity in him wanting my time. And I know my mom and brother felt that also. And I never really understood, and it was always felt, I don't know, a bad feeling towards my dad about that. So it was kind of an affirmation and made me feel some relief to know that really he has been wanting love and hasn't known how to ask, and there hasn't been blueprints or anything for him to read to know how to ask for that in the way he needs.
Yes. Juan, Juan's next. I
Hi.
totally.
So my quote kind of speaks to the ways in which we show love. This is on page 9 of the book. She says she's speaking about her experience with her father. She says, when he was home, his favorite way of relating was to tease and taunt his son mercilessly, in a biting voice full of sarcasm and contempt, a voice that could humiliate with just a word. And then at the end of that paragraph, she says, where and when along the way did you learn the practice of love? And that really resonated with me, because like growing up with my dad, it was, you know, when his way of showing care was, you know, he said, stand up straight, and you like whack me on the back, and, you know, like poking and prodding as ways of showing intimacy that I later learned, like, you know, this is somebody who just wants to be close, but doesn't know how to do that in like a, you know, what he would deem like acceptably masculine. And then with my little sister now, it's the same, like this constant like poking and prodding and teasing, when it's like that makes people uncomfortable, you know. And I've learned that, I mean, maybe at one point you have to just kind of confront that. And as I'm older now, I say like, well, let's just like hug me, you know. Like you don't have to do all that.
Thank you for sharing, Juan. If can anyone relate, or Agua, can you relate? Next. Or do you have anything separate to say on the stack?
I have a different passage, but yeah, I mean, I had a father who was on and off physically present, but not emotionally present. And it's just kind of like, damn, bro, like, Juancy, I want to give you a hug so bad when I see you next time. Like, it's the tenderness that heals. I can leave some space to see if anybody else wants to respond to Juancy first for a moment, and then I can jump onto what I was going to say. I don't know. Okay. Okay, Bobby, go off.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I was like literally raising my hand. I was like, how do you do this? But just on the context of, I just want to share that love for me, I had come to understand it very young through the men in my family, that love meant that if I was willing to fight for you, if I was willing to sacrifice myself for you, whether that meant getting into a fight or getting locked up and holding my tongue. That was love and honor. I'd come to understand that if they had truly loved me, they would teach me how to be of peace, and want harm to be away from me, and teach me how to be more in management of my temper, and especially if it meant if the whole concept was revolved around safety, because it seemed as if surviving was all that was happening, not actual living for so long. And you know what the brother spoke on as far as like the concept of how love's shown amongst my family, with the teasing, the poking and prodding. I'd come to understand even just comedy alone, if it's at someone else's expense, it's abusive. In the aspect of coming from a family, even the women, that if I wasn't angry enough to make my point, then I must not actually really care that much about it. My mother alone had been so used to being abused by her own father that by the time she's having her first child at 14 years old, she believes that being beaten was a part of love, being in love. And if he wasn't that in love with you, then yeah, he would know how to hold his temper. Or he loses control based on, that's how deep the love is, and all this kind of concept, to where I just came to understand that love is definitely kind, accepting, embracing, understanding, and forgiving. Something that I feel that can only happen through the divine, and more than anything, honesty without compassion is just abuse. So I come from a family that we keep it real, or I'm just blunt like that. I speak the truth, and people can't handle the truth. Nah, people can handle the truth. It's all about compassion, though, and how one's approach comes about it. So love is compassion and understanding for me. I just wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Agua, did you want to?
Yeah, bro. That's real as fuck though. Like the trauma that you've had that then like molds the way that you share your love and how you justify it, because that's how you are like, oh no, this person for sure loved me, so I know that this is how I also share love. Or like also like really toxic relationships where it's like you justify the toxicity because it's the depth of the passion of the love, and it's like, well, the reality is that they haven't even fully worked on loving their own selves to be able to know that they can't or they shouldn't be harming others as they are trying to express their love. So yeah, thank you, Bobby, and thank you, Hansi. That's real as fuck. My pronouns are they, he, by the way, Agua. And I mean, I have the audiobook, so I think this is page 43. I mean, not the audiobook, sorry, the online book. And it's the second paragraph on this. So when she's talking to men, and she goes, if you have closed off your heart, shut down your emotional awareness, then do you know how to love your sons? Where and when along the way did you learn the practice of love? And he tells me and the other men who sit in our circle of love, I just think of what my father would do and do the opposite. Everyone laughs. I affirm this practice, adding only that it is not enough to stay in the space of reaction, that being simply reactive is always to risk allowing the shadowy parts past to overtake the present. And then she goes on to explain how like the sons end up being similar to the grandfathers. And what the note that I took is doing the opposite of not love is not doing love. And doing the opposite of hurting is not being present. That they must learn how to actively and openly share their love. Like it's like it has to be intentional. You can't just not have a basis of knowing what to do and then do the opposite, because that's not coming from a foundation of knowledge or of support or of healing. It's like, I don't want that, so I'm going to do this, but I don't understand why this is so bad or why this is so good, or where the healing part takes place. Is how I just, that was just like something that really resonated with me, because I didn't think about that. Like when you see some men who have made the growth and made the change, like Are they doing it from a place of having processed and healed and grown? Or are they doing it, or are they doing it from a place of not knowing what to do, but knowing that that's what they don't want? And like, how do we change that? How do we help them not just react in the opposite, but how do we have them respond from like a healed core and a healed center? So that's what I wanted to bring to the table.
Thank you, Agua. Any responses to what Agua shared? Tiffany, I see that your hand is raised, unless there's someone else that's going directly responding after.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree with what Agua said, and I kind of come from a different perspective. One line that resonated with me was in the beginning at the preface. It's like literally first page. She talks about Deming and reading her book about men, and she's like, I wanted them to seem men to feel real or seem real, and I like really agree with that because I'm kind of a sister figure. My dad died before I was born, so I had two older brothers to look up to and kind of fill that role of men, I guess. And I always saw them as kind of like caricatures, someone to cut it up with, have fun with. But it was in those times when I was young and what was really confusing is those times where they wanted to come from love and vulnerability, and not really understanding like, no, you're supposed to perform this certain way. You're supposed to be this male type, I guess, figure, but not really understanding when they really did want to express love. And so this book really kind of made me realize why that was so confusing, because I mean, even for women, we were taught really early what men should be and how they should perform. And we never really give them that chance, that space to be, just simply be, as she kind of puts in the book.
Thank you, Tiffany. Anyone want to respond to what Tiffany just shared? I see their stack, so I want to go back into that. Unless someone wants to respond specifically what Tiffany shared. Unmute your mic.
There's just this moment on page 6 in the book that feels connected to what you shared, Tiffany, where she says most women do not want to deal with male pain if it interferes with the satisfaction of female desire. And, she goes into the whole piece around women's discomfort with men sharing, expressing vulnerable emotions. And that was something that I highlight, but definitely connected to what you were saying about it feeling confusing. Like, wait, hold up now, what's happening,
So real. Thank you. I think someone else mentioned they want to respond to this topic.
I think it was Alberta.
Yeah, Alberta.
Yeah, what Tiffany brought up, and it was like connected to something that I put like 4 stars next to, which was just a little bit after what was just mentioned on page 8, where she describes this like kind of disarming moment where her dad actually says, I love you both dearly. And she was amazed to hear that. And she couldn't find the words because fear silenced her. The new fear of breaking this fragile bond of caring connection. So she could not ask, what do you mean, Dad, when you tell me that you love me dearly? And that was really deep in like thinking about the ways I've related to men in my life. And just like, it's such a precious moment when the emotion is shared that it almost feels like this untouchable thing. And so I'm really interested in whether others have experienced that, and how talking about this stuff can help us like move through that and just ask the question, or find other ways to interact.
Thank you, Alberta. I want to go into Stack really quickly, y'all, because we got some folks there. Noor.
Actually, Shira's next, and then it's Terrell.
Oh, it's even further up. Okay. Thank you, Brittany.
One of the things that I didn't even write this down, but I remember it in my mind was when Belle so vulnerably shared that in a long-term relationship with a lover that she had, that she was encouraging him to be verbally, emotionally expressive, and that she had to admit to herself when his expressions of his emotions were not what she wanted to hear or wanted to, I guess, hold space for, that she became uncomfortable or experienced discomfort with that. And, you know, I just thought that was incredibly necessary to share and vulnerable. That's it.
I think
Can I just ask in response to that for folks who shared specifically about this topic, when we feel, for those who identify as women, when you feel discomfort around men sharing their feelings, where does that discomfort come from? Like, I think a lot of times what I've experienced is we assume we're not being uncomfortable because we're like, I'm hearing you, I'm listening, I'm holding space for you to share your emotions. But deep down inside, there might be some expectations or some discomfort with what's being shared, right? So where is there room has there been room for folks to address that discomfort? Or is it just something we are acknowledging that we feel? Have we worked through the moment where we have an expectation or an emotion with someone that's being vulnerable with us, and we realize, okay, we're not necessarily fully all the way there to hold space for this vulnerability? Is there a moment where we have been aware of that and experienced that?
Yeah, I feel like when I've felt that, it's usually because I know that when I've been vulnerable with a man, like they never do the same level of labor for me as I do for them when they're vulnerable with me. So I end up feeling like, why am I doing this? Like, I could just go to a woman and she would do a much better job, right? So, and like, I've tried to be that woman who, like, I guess trains a man to be better. But like, that feels like a waste of energy, right? And like, why should I have to do that as a woman? Like, and I get where Bell Hooks is coming from, and like she does say, there's a part, I don't remember what exactly it said, but it was about women being pissed off at men, and that those people aren't even feminists or something. And it's like, I guess, like, I kind of agree, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if I fully agree. Like, there comes a point where it's just like the oppressed person needs to take a step back and men need to do their own work. I don't know. Does that make me bitter? I'm not sure.
Thank you, Noor. Anyone who's next in the stack, Terrell or Davine, you guys are open to responding to that as well as whatever you want to share. I just thought it would be interesting to expound on that a little bit.
Yes, Terrell's next on stack. I don't know if they're still.
Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. Yeah, no, I do. That comment did remind me of the point where, like, yeah, you know, Bell Hooks is saying you can't change people. You can only kind of implore them to change or support their like willingness to change. But ultimately, like, right, we can't change anyone. They have to desire that. I think I'm going like super far back, but I did want to comment on, I think someone asked like, what do people feel love is, or specifically for some of the men, like what do we think love is? Yeah, I think it's definitely complex. I think currently I view it as kind of like it's this umbrella term for like a range of like feelings that people can elicit for us essentially. So like, you know, there's kind of emotional intimacy, like right, someone that you can kind of share your feelings and emotions and like right, your joy, your pain, your hurt, your excitement, you know, your maybe anxiousness and things like that with and feel like very safe with, right? So maybe the most intimate emotional relationships are right, basically you can kind of share any emotion and feel very safe in that and feel like the person will kind of understand. I think there's also right like intellectual intimacy. There's like, you know, people listening to the feeling of like you being desired, right? In like, you know, romantic relationships or even like in platonic, right? The people who, you know, they check in on you regularly, they invite you out to places, they set up things for your birthday without having to be told, right? You feel like they desire for you to like be in their life and things like that. So I think it's a huge umbrella for a lot of different, you know, things. But I think ultimately, right, a lot of love is like also knowing how to elicit like those positive feelings for people. And I guess that's what like love languages is a lot about, like understanding like I could be doing, you know, A through Z and the person still not like feel these like feelings you're trying to elicit if you don't understand like what, you know, makes them feel those things. And yeah, I think is in sharp contrast to like I think growing up, like love was a lot about like sacrifice. So love was more so like the person that loves you is like the person who like, you know, picks you up from O'Hare, you know, from the airport, you know, and drives, you know, an hour and a half to go get you, or like it was like, you know, a parent who worked 10 hours a day, you know, to get the groceries, but like love me. And that could be love independent of like the emotional aspects and like the intellectual aspects and like things like that.
Thank you, Terrell. Davine?
Thanks. My name is Davine, she, her. A line that really resonated for me on the electronic book, it's page 55 for hard copies. I think it's probably the last page of chapter 1. But she writes, women have believed that we could save the men in our lives by giving them love, that this love would serve as the cure for all the wounds inflicted by toxic assaults on their emotional systems, by the emotional heart attacks they undergo every day. And I think that just resonated because I think I have felt kind of the weight of that labor across different types of love with the men in my life, whether it's my brother, my dad, my intimate partners. So that line really hit for me.
Thank you.
Hey y'all. Yeah, I was gonna say that line to Davine, but it's perfect because I can just expound upon it. And I wanted to actually reference 2 parts. And the first one was, it's not a specific line, but she brings up the feminist movement a lot and brings up like critiques of the feminist movement a lot. And I just really appreciated that because, you know, I identify as a lesbian and as like a queer person. And I think in this day and age, for those of us that are active on social media, there tends to be this tendency where we start to separate and start to like just surround ourselves with people that are just like us and think just like us and like the same things that we do. And we create safe spaces to like be with those people. And so we're like, fuck men, men suck, cis men suck. And we do all these things because we want to keep each other safe. And so like, it makes sense, you know, like it's a defense mechanism. We're trying to protect each other. But we're seeing that like, even when we create those safe spaces, the people that are doing the harm, nothing changes. They're still doing the harm. So they're still like impacting our people. And so like, for me, it's like, if we're saying we have to like protect Black trans women, that doesn't only mean creating safe spaces for them. It also means talking to the men that are doing the harm and creating ways for them to transform, which is the most difficult thing to do, I think. And so like, it's hard, but that's why it also ties into what Davine was saying, where the question then becomes, well, who's responsible for changing these harmful men? And it's like, not necessarily up to the women. We can support, we can guide, we can instruct, but ultimately they want to have to change too. And we can like create ways to support them, but they have to want it. And so like, I think, you know, they really relate. And that's something that I've really been thinking about, because a lot of my friends are really like, protect Black trans women, and are also like, fuck men. And then nothing is done and nothing changes. So I really hope that we can move beyond that so that we can save our people and protect our people and have them live long lasting lives.
Anybody want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I want to jump in really quickly. Yeah, I'm also at that point of like exhaustion and like wanting to know like what is the best tools in the toolkit to kind of have these really difficult conversations with people who feel like they're progressive. Maybe they have some degrees or they're in certain more liberal spaces, they're artists or whatever, but they are still very much tied to the conditioning that we're all tied to, but like maybe even more so. So like, I think this book, I'm kind of looking for resources to have those difficult conversations because I'm at a loss myself. And yeah, and I don't know like the fatigue of it, you know, like I'll speak for myself, like in my own personal relationship and a heterosexual relationship, I feel so tired and worn. And like, I'm like, I don't know how much because I realize most of our issues it go back to toxic masculinity. Like it's like the root of it all. And if you haven't figured out how to have a healthy, functional relationship, a partnership. I was very lucky to have that model for me with my parents. And my dad is a super feminist, super liberal, but I haven't found that in a partner. So I feel like it's just this irony of like, damn, like I grew up with this. I know this exists, you know what I mean? But a lot of people haven't been around their fathers, you know, haven't seen that. So I think the fatigue for me has got me to a point where I'm just looking for tools. Or the other option is, and Black women are very loyal to Black men. I think that's another thing that I don't think she's addressed yet in this, is like how race on top of gender affects, you know. But like, when is that point where it's just like you got to let people walk their path and you just got to keep walking yours? So anyway.
I know we have a stack. I just wanted to respond really quickly to this thread of conversation. And I was with a cis hetero man before, and we would have the conversation. I would put in that labor, and that was able to be, you know, something that we breached and he was able to understand. But then afterwards, was he applying these conversations to his community of cis white men? Like that's where the change also comes from. Like them within their own circles and communities talking amongst it, because we can't just have constantly queer folks or femmes or women having these conversations with them. They must be having those conversations when these people are not around, when it's not with their partners, when it's not in spaces where they already feel comfortable in being vulnerable and open and recognizing their intersectional identity and their privilege. You know, it's like when you're sitting with your bros, what are you talking about? Is this a topic that you're having? And how are you addressing these things? Because I feel like that was what was never happening. Like they would remain in their like comfort circles of not having to question these things or bring it to their community, because then they would be ostracized in that community. Or, I mean, that's my assumption. I don't know, you know, I'm not in that bro circle, so I don't know. But it's like they don't want to do that in that circle, because then they're going to be the down kill or the like whatever, the party pooper, whatever the fuck the words are, for that. You know, it's better to be ignorant in your circle and not challenge them than it is to like bring the change or the awareness that you've made on your own or through conversations with queer folks, femmes, women, whatever, to these spaces of cis men or men.
Thank you. I saw some hands raised about this. It was Bobby, Marie, David, and Danielle. Let's try to keep our comments to like 2 minutes, please.
Okay, yeah. What came to my mind was that I tend to, or at least what helps me try to just gather my thoughts, is to personify this conversation between women and men, and really just looking at my own feminine side and my masculine side, and how grateful I am that my own feminist side never gave up on whispering within my own heart. and encouraging me and reminding me of how I can understand what it was attempting to tell me. I like what the sister said, that she don't know if she's bitter or not, and I don't either. But I will say that it made me think of healthy relationships being at the root of all this, and how the unhealthy aspect is thinking that speaking or attempting to support men, it is exhausting. Though it is exhausting, the failure of men to listen or learn isn't a reflection of the support. The support was still a success because it's what you chose to act upon. Now, it never has to be done, but when you choose to do it, it's still a positive choice, and that's still a reflection of your character or one's character. The failure is on the person or the failure to learn is the person that is ignoring the lesson. And then more than anything, it just reminded me of the fact that as a man, I know what kept me from hearing my own feminine side. And there is something that has been really deep rooted for the past however long that we've all been born into, which is that if I don't stick, if I go against the grain, then I may die. If I'm considered weak, then I may die. If I'm considered too sensitive, I may not eat and I may die. Like that's what's really at the primal perspective of what raised me. And therefore, anything that looked like it was attempting to challenge that made me feel like it was trying to kill me. The more that I felt supported and embraced, and actually given an example of what it looks like, and that it doesn't mean that I'm gonna die. If I were to open up my heart and cry whenever I felt that I needed to, then that's the ultimate lie that I feel. And I'll end with this: is that the colonizer, or however one puts it, the oppressor, the invader of lands that we now live on and call whatever name today, his greatest trick was to get us to colonize ourselves. And it definitely started with the men teaching each other that if we don't delete our emotions, then our village will be invaded again, and we will lose everything. So don't listen to the sensitivity in your head. These women, though we love them, may be a threat to our own safety. And I think that still goes on to this very day in so many different ways. Thank you.
Damn, Bobby. I love that. Someone recently asked me, and I was talking about just like when I was younger and like my toxic patterns, and they were just like, who were you emulating? Right? To Bobby's point. And it was like, at the end of it was like, damn, I was seeking the approval of like white men, like I was trying to fit into this norm of like, I gotta be more masculine. People tell me I'm like effeminate. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I'm just like, okay. So my response was, actually, how do I harden up and how do I become like hypersexual, hyper toxic, hyper all of this, to like kind of mask those moments of vulnerability, right? That I almost like came to regret that were in me. And just recently with the comment on like men need to talk to other men. Yeah, like it's only been like in the last, I'm 34 now, maybe like 4 years that I've actually started to challenge my male friends or friend groups when they are saying messed up things. And it's been hard, right? Because sometimes it is that like I could see in my friend group when the off button just turns off, they're not listening anymore. But it's like, well, I'ma still say it, I'ma still call you on it, and I'ma still have to do this. And I just think it's like a necessary step, right? That I didn't see as much growing up. So it's a learning process.
Marie?
I would like to share about my father, who was born in 1960. So, it's another generation. And what was interesting is, as a father, he was a very frustrated man. He was coming back and mother would say, wait until your father comes. So that's the father I knew as a kid. And then I started challenging him, and then we were they would separate us into, I was a communist and he was a really bad person. And what happened is that we were always separate in the room because we would fight. And then I grew up and I had a kid and realized that I was monoparental, so the only parent. I don't know, it's the same word in English. And what I realized was that I was the mother and the father. And that started melting me a bit, realizing what my father was going through and the expectation he had to face. But the most interesting is when he got retired, and when I had my son, it's the first son he saw. We are 9 children. And one day I came, I was pregnant, and say, "Oh, the baby is moving, it's so cool." And he says, "What are you talking about?" I say, "You have 9 children and you don't know that a kid is moving in the belly." I took his hand, I put his hand on my belly. And my father changed in a way that, whoa. And I started how little he knew about that world, that was woman world, that were kids, that was, and we started a conversation. I do agree that it's exhausting, it's long, it has been long, but it was so rewarding because I was able to ask him a question about his reality. And one of the most profound thing, or he told me, or it made me shift his perspective was, when we came back from the war, we were trained how to go back to work. We were never trained how to go back to a family. He had PTSD and he had children and he had no clue how to deal with that. So we were raised as an afterward, side effect. And where I'm going to do between that, it's how this understanding that it was not my father, it was where my father was raised in a society that started change my perspective, and understanding that what my father had never learned and experienced, I couldn't bash on him. I couldn't, aggress him and keep shaming him about him. He had no experience of those realities. And he was ashamed of trying to get into closer to us by my uncles who were saying that this man is a weak man and everything. And what I'm trying to shift, it's a bit confused in my head, but it's to my son now, who's 38, and who's raised by me, but by his father, who's the same as my father, no emotional links, who was not there. And when I kept putting my son as an individual and telling him how he doesn't know how to love, how to care, how to be connected, which he was as a kid, he just got frustrated and angry against me. And he wouldn't speak. Literally, he wouldn't speak to me. So for months, and we wouldn't speak. And then I realizing I was blaming him when I started much later than you to read all those things. But still, I'm trying to do the job. And realizing that I was blaming him for how he was raised in a society who had values and who was castrating, the society was castrating him, his desire to be a father, to be caring. But he had to go to a job who asked him to dissociate all day long. So now we have gained a new relationship by me asking him, what's not straight like that, what's love for him? What does he care for? What does he need as support? Instead of telling him, I'm asking him, because the other thing I understood is that as women, we have a perspective on love, but Maybe man doesn't have the same perspective. And I'm not talking about the toxic perspective. I'm saying it's the day I say to my son, do the vacuum, and says, Mom, stop, please. You will tell me to vacuum this way, this way, this way. I'm going to vacuum my way, and then you will see if it's done properly or not. But stop imposing your own ways of doing the thing. And I realize that sometimes we're still doing that to men who are trying, who are willing, who are showing up, but we are putting them too much in a very fixed way that we see the things has to be done, and not letting them do the experience by themselves and finding what they need. So it's not a solution. It's just
Yes, thank you, Marie. That was so helpful. I just want to leave room for Danielle and then to go back to the stack.
So when Bobby was talking, I was really hit by thinking about how when I've encountered things that I've tried as an adult and as an adult learner, sometimes when I don't get them right away, I get really frustrated and I automatically assume I'm just not good at that thing. And I was thinking about that in the context of learning how to love and how to interact with your emotions and express your emotions with someone else as a man, and how if one of them goes about it and he does have that moment where he does express, how frightening it must be, and how if someone reacts poorly to it, how some men who have wanted to for many years do this might shut down and might think, oh well, I was right in how I did it before because I was protected. And it made me think about the times that maybe I, as a woman in romantic relationships, might have shut down or maybe dismissed as toxic, but was really a moment where someone was trying to open and be vulnerable, but didn't really have the practice and tools. And like playing the piano, right, where I might recognize the tune very easily and it comes naturally to me because I've been practicing sharing my emotions and being intimate emotionally with women my entire life. Him plucking out the best way he can a tune I don't recognize, to me, I just dismissed it as wrong and saw it and maybe dismissed him in a way that I could have instead responded with empathy and patience.
Thank you. Yeah. I think something I want to, Brittany, I'll let you lead on who's next on stack, but something I wanted to, before you lead on the next person, bring up that people address to try to bring it home that's important is, what performances does capitalism reward? Because I think it's something that Bobby's bringing up and other folks, David and even Marie and Danielle, is that we live in a system and we live in a society, so we're not isolated. And I think we tend to have compassion when we talk about the ways that the system works out when it comes to race or when it comes to class. But I think when we come to gender, I don't think we have been as specific or as forward as we need to be around the ways that shows up in people's lives. And I think particularly what we're asking in this moment, in this question, we're starting to bring up in the conversation, is the will to change is not just about the person changing themselves, that it's also changing the society, a commitment to changing our society. So the assumption is that, well, if I, because I think somebody brought up race, and I think this happens with Black women and Black men, right? Like the idea for the struggle and the liberation to be one thing, and then we'll get to gender, we'll get to, all that other stuff. And I think what we're saying and what needs to be shared is that to be against capitalism, to be against white supremacy, to be against these larger structural issues, we have to be against patriarchy in the ways it shows up. And something I'm hoping people can touch on in the next few speakers is what's the difference between patriarchy and masculinity? Because I had a conversation with someone about this book before, And I think a lot of times men, the reason why men are resistant to change and or these discussions and conversations is because so often our society conflates the two. And the assumption is that masculinity is patriarchy. And I think bell hooks will go more into patriarchy in the next few chapters. But I think it is important for us to think about how systems work out in people. And I think it's great that that was brought up. So if folks can kind of start to think about those things in relationship to their personal connections to the book. Brittany, who's next on Stack?
Iman's next, and then after Iman, Tiffany.
Wow, I'm feeling tired and shaky hearing everything that everyone's saying, and appreciative. My original thought went back to, I was thinking about what Helen said, and it seemed to me that Helen was kind of raising the question of like, where does responsibility for change lie? And maybe I'll try to weave in one of the questions Aj just asked, not the second one, what's the difference between patriarchy and masculinity? Because that's a big question I've never asked myself, but how does capitalism reinforce behavior or aspects of masculinity, or what is that interchange? And so I feel like I got sick maybe 8 years ago, and I couldn't slow down. I had this idea that as a man, I had to perform, and I had to like grit my teeth and work harder and harder, even in the depths of illness. And I ended up making myself so sick, I was bedridden for years, and I'm still mostly stuck in bed because I felt wedded to this performance of masculinity and productivity that like culture was, or my idea of culture was asking of me. And I think when I think about this, where does responsibility for change lie? Like, I grew up in a household with a very emotionally distant father, and, you know, with this kind of productivity mindset and a kind of violence there. And over the years, like, my idea of like what a good person looked like was in opposition to my father. And I think in so many ways, my sensitivity, like, I was grasping to that as in opposition to my father, and I was trying to take the violence that I felt and that I felt in me and protect other people from it, and like hold it within. And I in effect, I think I was kind of applying that violence to myself, and in the hope of protecting the people in my life from that violence. And I've recently learned how much like that process shuts down my emotions, distances me from emotions. And even though it might protect others in my life from a kind of verbal or physical violence, it creates an emotional distance between me and them, and creates kind of an emotional violence and gaslighting and all these other forms, which are much more subtle, but also insidious in real ways. And so there's just this interesting thing I'm thinking about, which is that I took on this responsibility to not be like my father and to not carry that violence in the world and to hold it in. And that was the literal, in some ways, a very direct path to recreating maybe a slightly different version of that violence, but nonetheless perpetuating it in my relationships. And so this idea of like, where is the responsibility where is the responsibility for change held? Like, I was taking on that responsibility to not be like my father, and yet I became like him and trying not to be, because I didn't have the tools to help me get there.
Thank you, Eamon. I see that Bobby wants to respond, and then we'll go to Tiffany.
Okay, real quick. Yeah, just I feel that, and I don't know if I'm correct or incorrect. I think I'm right in the middle somewhere. But to me, the difference between patriarchy and masculinity is given. patriarchy is taking. And what I mean by that is that I will have masculinity whether I wanted it or not. Patriarchy is something that a position is made. There's an intention to place one emotion or masculinity over feminism. And it's a clear attempt to say that, declare inequality. And I believe that that is why it exists in the unequal realm that we know it as, because patriarchy can only exist through inequality, because it's literally the choice to say that this is worth more than the other, and therefore above. But masculinity is something that can be that has been given to men and women, and however one identifies. There's masculinity within, and by choice it can be utilized properly and equally. But it has to be by choice. That's all that hit me.
Thank you, Bobby. Tiffany.
Yeah, I totally agree with Bobby. I was kind of thinking about that difference between patriarchy and masculinity. And like Eamon, I'd never really thought about like that completely. But I think on, at least for the ebook on page 33, I'll like read a passage. She says, "Yet life has shown me that anytime a single man dares to transgress patriarchal boundaries in order to love, the lives of women, men, and children are fundamentally changed for the better." And in the next passage, she talks about kind of the violence of masculinity, and says, kind of especially ensued by the news. And she says, we're bombarded by the news about male violence. We hear no news about men in love. And I was thinking, like, what are examples of men transgressing this patriarchal boundary to better us all? And I couldn't really think of a lot based off kind of what I read and what I see often. So like what Bobby said, I think, patriarchy is this larger system, and masculinity ends up being this performance, this kind of, and the violence that yields from that performance, trying to interpret what that means, what this kind of arbitrary word means. So I found that very enlightening.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Terrell.
Oh yeah, I wanted to respond to the point of, right, like who kind of holds responsibility for change. And yeah, I think, like in any other case, like, the folks who are like causing the harm, right, should take like primary responsibility for like, ceasing the harm, right? So like men need to be like doing the work and, like taking those risks, right? We, in any other space, right, we ask folks who are on that side of things, right, to take a risk to, to create positive change and like hold folks within your, identity group accountable. So I do feel like that's like right where the primary responsibility lies. But I think also kind of like, how Bell Hooks is saying, like, to get to this, endpoint of, right, society's values have changed to the point, right, where we've reduced so much harm just because, right, a lot of the like forms of violence are like no longer deemed like acceptable in society. I do think takes like, people from all different types of identities like joining in at different points. But I do think men need to be taking, primary responsibility for, this in the same way, like, right, that we ask like white folks to take primary responsibility for like, issues related to like racism and things like that.
Thank you, Terrell. I do want to hold space for folks to have some last final comments before we do takeaways. One of the things I wanted to ask about that I was curious from the group, if anybody has any final thoughts on this, is around like expressing emotion. Because one of the things that Belk says towards the end of the chapter is she talks about, she writes in response to the questions about love asked me by men I know most intimately who are working to find their way back to open-hearted, emotionally expressive selves they once were before they were told to silence their longings and close their hearts. And one of the things that I grapple with Belle on this, like back and forth, is that I feel her, but sometimes I feel like she misses the mark, where I don't think it's that men don't express themselves or don't express their emotions. I think it's about how they express themselves and their emotions and what ways are affirmed in society, what expressions are affirmed and rewarded in society. And so that's something I grappled with, because I think oftentimes the assumption is that men are not emotional, or that they aren't showing their emotions, or that they're being, silence is an emotional response. Aggression is an emotional response. Violence is an emotional response. But I think that one of the questions that I had in relationship to men that I talked to was like, it was interesting. It changed my perspective on things, because one of my friends said, sort of to what Bobby was talking about, I'm expected to protect the women in my life. So in that moment, a guy who said this, women will come to me and be like, oh, a guy did this, or like his sister called him one time because some guys violated against her and he had to rush to handle the situation. He ended up going to jail off of that situation. And he's like, in that moment, there's an expectation for him to show up in a specific way as a man to handle violence with other men. And so I think it goes back to what Bobby's saying. I want us to leave us with kind of this grappling, and hopefully have conversations about this, and people can touch on this now. But there are moments when certain emotional expressions in society are rewarded, because that's the name of the game, right? We're in a society where violence is the name of the system. The system moves violently. And so I think one of the things our men are grappling with, from what I've heard that I did not necessarily think about, was that moments when someone is rewarded to be violent in one moment and not told, oh, there's, you can't be violent here. I think that's where the disconnect is, and that we have yet to deal with systemic violence that perpetuates violence on our people, that then makes men be the front line for violence in our communities, that then allows the violence to come back to those that they believe they're protecting, right? Or that they see themselves as protecting. And I think that that's part of what my struggle is how to talk to men about that. Because I've noticed this, I don't know if other people in this space have, and I would love to hear y'all's response. I've noticed that I do expect some of the men in my life to show up physically for me if I need to, because I can't, because I know that men are physically more powerful, can, in some instances, not always, but can cause harm in physical ways that does need protection from. And so I think that balance between where do we express our anger, where do we express our violence, where is it okay to do that, and then where does it become toxic? I think this is the point of contention in our community that we have yet to address. And I would love to hear from folks their final thoughts on that, if there's any, before we close out. Oh, I see Nadia said that's all. Oh, Shantae, please.
I think like I agree with a lot of what I heard tonight. I think one of the things that Bobby was saying earlier, and that Aja, that you just shared about, the survival and what's rewarded under a capitalist system, is really something that our, like, specifically I see the Black community kind of grappling with in real time today around what's appropriate regarding masculinity. I see it as like, Black people right now are kind of learning out loud how to move from just survival, which was necessary under enslavement and under capitalism, to being able to live and then also to thrive. And I kind of see something similar happening regarding patriarchy. So what does it mean for our communities to understand that we can protect ourselves, we can protect our loved ones, we can show up, we can heal and hold one another accountable without like hyper masculinity or toxic masculinity? Like, what is that balance? So like, when I was growing up, I grew, because to answer one of the questions from before, like I think patriarchy is about power. Like patriarchy and matriarchy are about who has the power in a specific community. So I grew up with a lot of women, and there's this like famous story of one of my aunts was in a relationship where there was domestic violence. And at that time, you know, there's lots of women in the family who were adults, and all the sisters showed up together and distributed the violence. So in that case, you know, the means of protection for a person in the community had nothing to do with masculinity. It had nothing to do with patriarchy. And I think, you know, whether it's because she does talk about this violence. So whether it's based in violence or just accountability or ways of holding and growing with one another, like I think we have to start shifting that perspective. And it's interesting today because, you know, this whole thing with Bill Cosby's happening. And we're like, I am seeing like kind of in real time from comments from people like my loved ones, my friends, like just this divide of like, are we standing with Black men? Is this about supporting Black men? Is this about, you know, our community and holding one another down? Or is this, you know, about there was violence here, there was exploitation of individuals, there was sexual assault, you know, how do we hold a member of our community accountable responsibly? And I think it is like about what hopefully we're going to hear more about in this book, which is that will to change. And I was super excited hearing some of people's examples and reflections tonight, like David shared, speaking with other men about these things and like expressing your feelings, like those small drops in the bucket, you know, like I think every faith or every person has this kind of understanding of like, you know, for me, my background was the faith of a mustard seed, or where two people are gathered. Like those little things in our culture give an invitation to other people, like Helen just said, to, you know, feel comfortable to say, I can be outside of this expectation of toxic masculinity here, or even, you know, toxic femininity. And I think I'm over 2 minutes. I'm sorry, guys.
That was perfect. That was perfect. Thank you so much. Melissa, great to have new voices speaking. Thank you, Melissa.
Hey, let me know if there's trouble with the Wi-Fi, but I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but I'm kind of ruminating on this relationship to capitalism. And I feel like at one point, maybe when I was much younger, there was like this expectation that we would just know our place, know how to relate, know how to communicate. And now where I see things, and I feel like this connection to capitalism is just about like getting things right without having a space for growth, development, and like evolution. And so now there's this expectation of like, well, if you don't know, just ask and I'll tell you. And when I think about like my own, you know, what I value and what I appreciate, is like, I actually kind of want you to figure it out. Like I look at that as, you know, a expression of your love for me. If you take in, you know, our interaction and you're able to figure it out, and not necessarily that there's an issue with the asking, but more so like
just the need to get it right and move on. And I feel like there's a loss with that, without that in between space of evolution and development. And I feel like that has a lot to do with, you know, our society and the expectations that it places on all of us to just get things right and keep it moving.
Yeah, I want to say that Helen brought this up, and I want us to think about this when we see our hope that this discussion will lead to us being more accountable in our own lives to the things that we're reading and processing, and also sharing what we're learning, what we're receiving from these conversations and some of the takeaways that we have. I've been taking notes. But one of the things I think is important is that we can't just silo ourselves in our groups and say, okay, well, if you don't know all these answers, that's what it is and that's it. You know, I think the thing that I love about this book is that it's the will. It's literally the will. Like, that's what we're asking for. We're not asking for the answer or the knowing or the being of it. We're saying the will is it. That's the love. The love is the will to change. It is the effort, and what you're talking about, Melissa, or what Shantae was talking about, where two people are gathered, right? Also the discussion around collective ass whooping, like, mind-blowing. That's a mind-blowing takeaway for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that is something that we do in the Black culture sometimes, but the idea that, like, okay, we don't hold it on one person to be the definitive representation of how we hold accountability. I do think, though, we have not had a discussion as a community about, we want to talk through everything. And sometimes you can't talk through a gun. You can't talk through a fist. You can't talk through some of the ways that violence is coming in our community. So I think that while we're reading through the book, I would love for us in the next few chapters, just be thinking about that as a takeaway. Like, how do we, this is a conversation we're all grappling with, Mariam Kaba and Derricka Purnell and Kianga Taylor, these academics and scholars and organizers. How do we deal with harm? How do we deal with the harm and violence of a system, of military, a militarized society, right? These are things that we are all working through. So I just think, thinking about how patriarchy works out in our visions and our imaginations of this idea of accountability or, you know, rectifying harm or rectifying violence and assault in our neighborhoods, in our smaller communities, but also large communities. I would love for folks to, in these last few minutes, to share some of the highlights of what you took away in this discussion today. If there's anything that really, you know, stuck to you and struck you and really affirmed you in this discussion, we would love to write those things down and make sure we have a highlight on them. Let's try to have folks who didn't speak, please. And if you're speaking is not your thing, type it in there for us, please. I'm not afraid to call people out. Okay.
Jameson.
Yeah, let's go.
Hey y'all. Thank you to everyone who's participated. This has been a really wonderful, rich conversation, and it has served this purpose for what I was hoping for myself, which was I started this book maybe a couple of years ago and got a couple chapters in and was wild with it. For whatever reason, you know, I lost track of reading it. And so this was like, okay, this is my call to finish it and also be in community with other people who are wanting to do all of the work to reform and to think of new ways of being. And I think as a man, for me, that's what the biggest takeaway and that I've gotten from what's already been read is bell hooks provides language and things that resonate that I, you know, all my life felt and I couldn't speak myself. And I think the beautiful thing that a lot of people have said, but the idea of the will to change is simply to engage in the process. And that process is messy. That process isn't easy. That process should be difficult, especially for all of us who are being impacted by it. And And that's the big takeaway from the first chapter, is Belle lays it out like, this is something that impacts all of us. And so we can't sit on the sidelines. I think it's on men, especially because we're the ones, it's in us. We are individual manifestations of that collective, patriarchal consciousness. But by having the will to change, we begin to like see other ways and other possibilities of being in the world. And if we engage in that process, it could actually lead to some really significant change.
Thank you so much, Jameson. I see Holly has her hand raised.
Hey folks, thanks so much for creating this space. I've been taking down a lot of notes, and I would say a few things that I'm walking away with tonight are the points that Helen and Agua raised, where, we can't be fatalists and just say like, fuck men, I don't have a responsibility in this work, but also holding men accountable to having these conversations intercommunally. And then Aja, I really appreciated what you were explaining about the idea of men's violence potentially creating a bounce back effect to where it actually ends up harming the people they're aiming to protect, even if that violence is initially to protect the same population. So that's definitely some good food for thought. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I don't know if Davine wants to say something.
I think they typed because.
Oh, got it. No, just kind of something that was coming out of the side conversations was that I'm gonna be thinking about a lot as we continue this book is thinking about the labor and the way in which we value labor. Obviously, there was a lot of conversation about the kind of labor that comes in for like holding men accountable and talking through men, but something that I've also been thinking about in my own practices is like the labor that I've been going through for holding myself accountable and holding other men accountable, and respecting that and kind of like holding space for that work too, and something that I'm curious about how Bell Hooks continues to discuss.
Thank you. There's Mel, and I don't know if Melissa, that's a new hand raised or not, but Melissa, okay, Mel.
Hi. Yeah, I think, Bobby, something that you said just made me think about love being an inhale and an exhale, being both. And in those moments where I feel angry at the men in my life for not showing up, sometimes I can do a bit of restraining breath. And I've just been thinking during this conversation about the way that as a woman, I feel like I've been valued for my ability to listen and to hold space. But it's been really healing when people have said, like, here, you can use your voice, you have that permission and you have that capability. And it's not been a frequent experience for in that invitation to also feel people be angry or disappointed as I'm growing in my ability to use my voice. And so I've just been thinking about the ways that in relationships, sometimes when I'm inviting a man to practice feeling their emotions, sometimes it can be from a place of so much from a place of yearning and need, that there can be frustration and anger in the process of watching somebody struggle through that. And so I think this conversation is just bringing about a desire to learn how to give that permission and offer that invitation, but let it be from a place of other and not from a place of need or scarcity.
What a word. That's a word. Okay. Any final thoughts from our team? Brittany, Hollis, Helen?
I just really liked hearing everyone's opinions and like where everyone is at, because yeah, there's like also things I'm grappling with, like how do we deal with violent harms within our community from an abolitionist standpoint, especially when a lot of us just have like so much pain from generations of like those cycles of harm. And I'm excited to like get deeper into the book so that we can discuss like tools that we can use to try to mitigate those type of harms. And I appreciate everyone like Eamon and Bobby just like going into detail about the ways that patriarchy has affected them and the ways that they've internalized patriarchy. I just really value that perspective. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for the way everybody shared so vulnerably. And I know I definitely connected to, I think it was Helena, who shared like, I'm looking for tools in this book. And so just have appreciated the vulnerability from everyone and looking forward to the next time.
Awesome. Are people okay with the fact that we're doing 2 chapters every 2 weeks? Cool. Not too much, not too little.
I just want to say that the audiobook is great, y'all. I listened to that on my train ride to my art studio and it was so good. So, I mean, it's on Audible. That's helpful.
Thank you. All right.
And I just wanted to say thank you for having me again. I look forward to the further discussion. So many gems, so many nuggets. Also like to just acknowledge my own comfort of being able to feel supported by this lovely lady that is Zira J, my girlfriend, and just being able to share this moment, be in this kind of conversation, and continue to be a student. Thank you.
Bobby, thank you. And thank you for your partner's support of you in this time. We're so grateful for the both of you joining this conversation. We look forward to having her perspective and voice in the next and upcoming conversations. We hope that the book will continue to bring depth and insight and peace, but also love into our lives, all of your lives, and that we find ways to, maybe the book is not the thing that people will read, but the way that you're processing it, people watching you process it and witness it, your processing of it can help change someone too. So, maybe people's language isn't to read and they don't have that experience, but share your thoughts or your reflections with folks. I think that's a way that people can enter the conversation beyond the book club. And feel free to email us or text us any questions, concerns, or ways that you would like to be further included or participate in the next facilitation. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you to Helen for holding it down, doing all the tech facilitation and sending out the emails. And we appreciate y'all's support. We want to be in struggle with you. We want to be in solidarity with you. And we need you all to continue this work and to be a part of this container for the change that we want to see in the world. So have a great night, y'all. Bye.
Bye. The Discord link.
Yes.
Let me save that.
The team is going to stay on while you all disappear. So disappear.
Not while you all disappear. I was like, we need some jazz to close us out for next time. Like when you hear the jazz, you know it.
Yes, we should have a closeout song.
Get the fuck out, in other words, did you? You ain't got to go home, but you got to get out of here.
I don't have that, but I'm like, what do I have?
All right.
Elizabeth's still here.
Elizabeth probably stepped away.
I just removed it. It's fine.
Yes, Brittany.
That was so fun.
Y'all feel?
Yay! First one.
Y'all did it. Congratulations. That was beautiful.
Bobby was a gem.
Yes.
A gem.
And so many points that were made. I want your soul to be well.
That was the gentleman with the glasses, right?
Yeah, and if they loved me, they would teach me to be a beast. Honesty without compassion is abuse. The first lie I ever believed was that boys don't cry. From regret to remorse to accountability. We can't heal what we can't feel. It's the tenderness that heals. Support is a choice and is a reflection of the character. That was a gem that Bobby said. Like talking about when someone responded about feeling like it's exhausting.
Yes, and he was like, it's the act of doing it. Like,
that's love. And if like they don't choose to learn or they don't take the lesson, that's not your fault. It's not your job to make them take the lesson or for them to learn the thing that you want them to learn. It's the fact that you choose to do it is a reflection of your character. And I was like, deep. What about other stuff for y'all? Y'all feeling good?
I feel good. I just like hearing everyone's different perspectives on like men stuff. This Bill Cosby thing, I'm like, when they brought the Bill Cosby thing, I was like, if they don't kill this man, but that's just my opinion.
I think it was an important interjection that you made, Aja, when you were like started asking like more specific questions. Like I thought that was good because I think it was kind of getting like, and then you were like, okay. So that was good. Like I really love that question. Like that's key of like what's the difference between masculinity and patriarchy. And I still think we only scratched the surface. So I think it would be cool to bring it back up again, especially in the next chapter, since it's on patriarchy.
Yeah, for sure. It's good to like put it in their heads now so that they, while they're reading.
Yeah, they can sit with that. That was great.
I was wondering too if it might be nice the next time to questions like that have like, in my mind, they're like, I see them as anchor questions and maybe have them visually somewhere. Because I know sometimes like when lots of voices are happening, sometimes people just need to see the question to be able to like jump to keep it in the back of their mind. So maybe if the structure is that we'll play like 2 clips of media that we actually share in the agenda of like 4 questions that we might want folks to grapple with, or maybe that goes in the email. I don't know.
I love that, Hollis. I also was thinking like, I think because we're just building trust and it's like the first session, like I love that everybody was like so respectful of each other, mindful and like very aware of how they were showing up. So it's like, even though it's like random internet, like you don't know who's gonna show up, it was actually like really a beautiful crowd and like so varied and like seems like people are coming from a lot of different places. I'm like, what was I gonna say? Damn, wow, I really missed it. Okay, come back to me, I guess. Yeah, I don't know what I forgot. I don't know why I blanked, but anybody else jump in? I'll remember.
Helen, I saw your question asking what are pronouns, and I honestly didn't know how to explain that, so I just didn't. But I figured that we could talk about like how would you like us to define that next time?
I think luckily like a lot of people that were in this space knew, but just to like make it plain as much as possible whenever you can, even with like stack, like how people didn't know what that was. So it's like whenever there's like kind of a new word, it's just better to like break it down. Usually how I explain pronouns is very simple. It's just like if somebody leaves a room, how would they like to be addressed? Like, you know, and then you can give examples. Just because that like it's like it doesn't go into like the philosophical or like the like deep definition of it, but it's like a practical definition that's useful. And the thing that I wanted to say that I remembered was this: it would be awesome if we could like hold space for people to disagree. And so like I guess I don't know, people were very respectful of each other, but I think we get into the habit of being like, I agree, just to like feel good. But you know, I wonder like if there's anything that we can say in a community guideline or something like that of like how do we create space for like when disagreement happens and how do we like hold the space when that happens as a team.
Well, I think anchor questions can be good for that because, you know, the way that it's set up now is that people are just sharing what resonated with them. So I don't know. Like, I know if I'm waiting to speak about the thing that's resonating with me, I more so maybe want to talk about that than acknowledge that I may disagree with the thing that you've said before me. But if there's a if there's a segment in the program where it's like, what are everybody's thoughts about this thing? Or maybe it's even introduced by one of us as the facilitator. There was a moment that you said, Aja, that you didn't think, there was something you said you didn't fully agree with bell hooks on, but like maybe introducing it that way. So like getting multiple perspectives, but like making it a moment in the program.
Yeah, it was about expressions of emotions. I think I feel you, and I also feel like part of, I don't want this to feel like it's a class or it's like a situation where people feel like they're in like a real meeting, you know, too. I almost want it to feel kind of casual, but have some structure. So maybe we have the questions for us and we put them out in the chat. But I also think the other part of it is I did also say what brought discomfort. And so maybe what we could do is what we can do is every sort of the way that we said we would like every meeting to go, which is lines, you know, questions that were raised for us or that came up for us. And then we said, what brought discomfort or what was affirming? And then we said the takeaways.
That's really good.
I think every meeting we just have that sent to the group in the Zoom.
Yeah.
Before we even do it. And it's just like, okay, we're doing the lines moment. Cool. We're doing the questions moment. Cool.
And Helen, I feel like you did a great job of keeping time too, of like, okay, you know, like, so maybe that can be a thing too, of like really timing out how long we'll do questions for each, just so there's a flow. I feel what you're saying, Aja, in terms of like it not wanting it to be super like bip, 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 and it feel organic. And that was something special, I think, today. I think for me, the whole visual piece is just because I know I'm a visual learner and I was like, so I yeah. So I love like putting the questions in the chat too. Could be a way that that's accomplished.
Oh, sorry, y'all. Someone tried to enter our meeting just now.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe they thought it was still going on. All right.
Okay. I took notes. You tired? Gotta go get food and a drink. I'm gonna go meet up with Dashni actually.
I am
here? She's here for like 2 days.
Oh, I thought she was going to New Orleans.
Maybe also, I don't know.
So she's gonna go there and then New Orleans probably. Cool. So let's touch base, Helen, before you put up whatever, because I don't know if we're gonna put quotes from the book or notes from the discussion. So we should figure out which one. Because there was a lot of things I like that people said that I think should be, and questions that would be cool to ask the public.
I think that's better because we're telling people to read anyway, so we could just do that. And we already shared quotes from the preface.
So maybe it'd be good to send the video. I would love to look at it.
Oh yeah, the video. Yeah, I'll send it out. It's gonna be on our new Zoom cloud or whatever. So they'll send a link, and then I'll share that with y'all.
Awesome. All right, beautiful ladies.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have fun.
Y'all. Yay.
Okay.